You know, a lot of times in Scripture, I read the word fool or foolish. And a lot of people think that a fool is somebody who's stupid, who just, is a moron or an idiot. But that's not what I seem to get out of the Scripture when I read those Scriptures that deal with that word. In fact, my definition of a fool is not somebody who's stupid, who lacks intelligence. I think someone who is a fool or who's acting foolish, being a fool, is someone who knows what they're supposed to do, but then they choose not to do it. Now, to me, that's the biblical definition of a fool. Look over in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew, 7th chapter, right at the end of that Sermon on the Mount, where Christ talks about two builders. And we pick it up in the 24th verse of the 7th chapter of Matthew. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them may be compared to a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded upon the rock. Then Christ goes on. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act upon them will be like a fool, or will be a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against his house, and it fell. You see, the difference in these two were not a matter of intelligence, because they both had heard the words of Christ. The wise man who built his house upon the rock, and the foolish man, or the fool, who built his house upon the sand. They both heard the words of Christ. They were not ignorant. It's what they chose to do with the knowledge they had. One chose to listen to the words of Christ and start building his life upon that truth of his message. The other one heard the words of Christ and decided to have no effect on his life whatsoever. And the difference, Christ says, is one has a solid foundation, has a solid foundation on the truth of God. And that man is wise. The other one doesn't have that foundation, and he's acting foolishly. He hears what Christ has said, but he chooses not to act upon it. Now, my question for you today is this: are you being wise, or are you being foolish? For see, you've heard the words of Christ. You know a lot of the truth of God. So let me ask you, are you acting upon it? Is the truth of God having an effect on your life? Are you being wise, or are you being a fool? The wise man listened and acted upon it, and his house was on the rock. The foolish man knew the truth of God, chose not to act upon it, not to have any effect on his life. And Christ called him a fool, and his house fell. And listen to the end of that verse. And the winds blew and burst against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Are you being wise, or are you being a fool?